The wind in the Arizona-New Mexico territory had a voice. It did not whisper. It scoured. It spoke in a language of grit and sand, carrying the smell of artemisia and the empty ache of distance. This wind, blowing across the high red plateau in the late 1860s, was the only constant Clara Whitfield felt she knew. Today it was a monster. She stood on the sagging porch of the ranch house, one hand gripping the raw wood post, the other shielding her eyes. A wall of dust, the color of dried blood, was moving in from the west. It was not a storm. It was an erasure. It was the land itself rising up to swallow the sun, the sky, and the small, struggling flock of sheep huddled in the scrubland pasture. This world, she thought, not for the first time, could swallow a person whole if she stood still too long. Clara Whitfield was 22 years old and had never stood still. She was built of the same practical, unyielding material as the land itself. Her hair, the color of wet straw, was pulled back so tightly it made her gray eyes seem wider, more alert. She was not beautiful in the way of the painted ladies in the catalogs that arrived, months late, at Silas Crowder's mercantile. She was strong. Her hands were chapped, the knuckles split, her shoulders set from hauling water and birthing lambs. Inside her, beneath the layers of dust and duty, lived a different Clara. A Clara who understood the fine weave of silk versus the honest weight of wool. A Clara who dreamed not of a husband or children, but of the crisp, clean scent of a dress shop, a place with glass windows and a proper floor, far away from the grit that worked its way into every fold of her skin. She was, as the town matrons would whisper, a virgin, untouched. But her purity was not a matter of romantic hope. It was a matter of Puritan practicality. She had no time for the fumbling, messy business of courtship. Her body was a tool for work, just as her mind was a tool for sums. Love was a luxury, like lace, and she had no coin to spare. The dust storm hit the house with a roar, a million tiny fists beating against the sun-baked wood. Clara. She turned. Her brother, Jamie, stood in the doorway. At 14, he was a sketch of a man, all sharp angles and restless energy. He was wiping dust from a rifle with a greasy rag. "It is just the wind. Jamie, it will pass." "It is taking the topsoil with it," he said, his voice cracking. He was trying to sound like their father. Crowder was in town. He said the note is past due by 2 weeks. Clara's spine stiffened. Silas Crowder. The name was a sickness in her throat. Crowder owned the mercantile, the saloon, and it felt most of the debt in Dry Creek. He was a patient spider, and her family was the fly. Her father, Abel Whitfield, had woven the web. Abel had come west with a dream and a wife. He had returned from the war with a hollow cough and a thirst. Clara's mother was buried on the rise behind the house, taken by a fever 5 years gone. Abel had been drowning himself, slowly and gently, in cheap whiskey ever since. He was a good man, a kind man, but his grief had made him weak, and Crowder fed on weakness. The debt was a monstrous thing, a number that Clara wrote down in her ledger every night and stared at until the figures blurred. It was for seed, for flour, for tools, for the very whiskey that kept her father numb. And Silas Crowder, with his soft hands and his watchful eyes, wanted more than the money. He wanted the land. This patch of scrub and rock was nothing special, except for one thing, the seasonal creek bed that marked its western border. It was a line on a map, but it was also a line of tension. The grazing lands here were a patchwork of old claims and new thirsts. The army patrols that rode through, looking for trouble, often created it. They talked of progress, of moving the tribes onto reservations, but their presence only sharpened the edges of hate. Scalp hunters, men with dead eyes and bloody bragging rights, passed through Dry Creek, selling their grim wares for bounty, stirring up fear that men like Crowder could twist to their advantage. Clara ran the ranch. She did the books. She negotiated for shearing. She rode the fence lines. She raised Jamie, trying to fill the hole their mother had left with a stern, practical love that he was just beginning to resent. "Mr. Crowder knows we are good for it," Clara said, her voice flat. Turning back to the storm, "The wool will be ready in a month." "He was talking to Harlan," Jamie said, naming the sergeant who led the local patrol. They were laughing. A cold knot formed in Clara's stomach. Crowder and the army. That was a new, ugly alliance. The storm raged for an hour, then 2. When it finally subsided, the world was changed. The light was a bruised purple, the air thick with a silence that felt heavy. The sheep were just visible, huddled against a rock formation, their coats brown with dust. "I am going to check the flock," Clara said, pulling her hat down low. "And the creek line. This wind might have taken down the fence." "I will come," Jamie said, picking up the rifle. "No, you will stay and help Pa. He will be unsettled after the storm. See if you can get him to eat. I will not be long." She did not want Jamie near the western line. Not today. She saddled old Meg, a mare as pragmatic and joyless as she was. The ride out was slow, the ground altered by new drifts of sand. The air smelled sharp, clean, the artemisia scent released by the wind's violence. This land, she thought, was always 2 things at once. It was a prison of dust and debt, but it was also a place of terrible, stark freedom. There was no one to tell her what to wear, how to speak, who to be. There was only the work, the sky, and the horizon. She found the flock, counting them with a practiced eye. None lost, just terrified. She moved on, toward the western border. The creek bed was dry, as it always was this time of year, a scar in the red earth. It was this dry creek that gave the town its name and its desperate hope for water. The fence was down in one place, just a few posts snapped by the wind. She dismounted, her boots sinking into the soft sand. As she bent to check the wire, she saw it. On the flat face of a sandstone boulder, just inside her property line but facing the lands beyond, was a handprint. It was not painted on. It looked as if someone had dipped their hand in thick dark red ochre and pressed it hard against the stone. It was a man's hand, large and strong. It was stark, defiant, and clear. Clara had heard the stories in town, the rumors. Dry Creek was afraid of the Dine, the Navajo people who lived in the mesas and canyons to the north. Most settlers only saw them in town, trading blankets for flour, quiet and watchful. But there were other stories, whispered over whiskey at the saloon. Stories of a warrior, a shadow rider, who guarded the hidden springs and water sources. They said he moved like a ghost, that he was protecting sacred lands. The patrols called him a menace. The scalp hunters called him a challenge. Clara looked at the handprint. It was fresh. The ochre was still damp at the edges, not yet baked dry by the sun. She had heard of these signs. They were warnings, markers of territory. This one seemed to be pointing right at the dry creek bed, a place no one thought held water. A sensible woman would be afraid. A sensible woman would ride back to the house, lock the door, and tell Sergeant Harlan. Clara Whitfield was practical. She touched the brim of her hat. She was on her land. The handprint was on her land. She had no quarrel with the Dine. Her quarrel was with Silas Crowder. This red handprint was just another complication in a life already tangled with them. It was a symbol of a conflict she had no interest in, a fight over water when she was drowning in debt. She registered it, filed it away in her mind, and then dismissed it. It was not her problem. Not today. She turned back to the fence. The wire was sharp, and she worked carefully, her chapped hands methodical. She had to fix the fence. She had to count the sheep. She had to get the wool to market. She had to pay Crowder. She had to protect Jamie, and what was left of her father. And then, someday, she had to get out. She would sell this harsh, beautiful, killing land. She would take her honor, what little money she had, and her skill with a needle. and she would go east. She would build a life that was soft. Clara pulled the last wire taut and secured it to the post. The sun was setting, turning the bruised sky into a spectacular, violent riot of orange and purple. She mounted Old Meg and looked back at the red handprint. It seemed to glow in the fading light, a silent, stubborn claim. She turned her horse for home, riding away from the warning, the weight of the ranch settling back onto her shoulders like a familiar yoke. The wind was quiet now, but she knew it was just resting. 2 days passed. The dust from the storm settled, but the tension did not. It coated every surface, a fine grit in the air they breathed. Abel Whitfield had retreated further into his bottle, his silence a heavy, sour blanket on the small house. Clara moved through her chores with a rigid efficiency, her mind a ledger of dwindling numbers and rising panic. Jamie was a coiled spring, his earlier resentment now replaced by a sullen, simmering anger that she did not know how to breach. On the third morning, the silence broke. Clara was at the well, the rope biting into her palms. When she realized it, the quiet was too deep. Jamie was not in the barn. He was not mending the fence line. And their best horse, the strong bay they had been saving to sell after the shearing, was gone. A piece of paper was nailed to the barn door, weighted by a horseshoe. Jamie's crude, childish script was a punch to her gut. "Gone to fix it. Do not follow." "Jamie," she whispered, the name a dry leaf in her throat. "Fix it." The hollow, desperate promise of a boy trying to do a man's job. He was going to Crowder. He was going to offer the horse, their last real asset, as payment. And Crowder would laugh. He would take the horse and the land. Clara ran. She did not bother with a saddle. She pulled Old Meg from the corral, looped a rope into a hackamore, and hauled herself onto the mare's broad back. She knew the way Jamie would go, not the main road, where he would be seen. He would take the canyons, the western line, the one that led past the dry creek. She rode with a desperate, cold fury. Fury at Crowder for his patient poison, at her father for his weakness, at herself for believing this could be managed, and a hot, terrified fury at Jamie for his stupid, noble, childish heart. The tracks were easy to follow in the sandy soil. They led right where she feared, past the fence she had mended, past the stone with the red handprint. The handprint seemed to watch her as she rode by, a silent, knowing witness. Her breath caught as the tracks veered left, up into a narrow slit in the canyon walls she had always avoided. The passage was tight, the red rock rising on both sides, and the air grew suddenly cool and damp. She heard a sound she had never heard in this place, the unmistakable, impossible trickle of water. She dismounted, her boots silent in the sand, and led Meg forward. She rounded a high wall of sandstone and stopped. The canyon opened into a small, hidden basin. Water wept from the rock face, trickling down mossy stones into a pool so clear it was almost invisible. It was a sacred, secret place. Jamie was there. He had the bay on a lead, and he was trying to corner a small, nervous pinto that must have been drawn by the water. His face was streaked with sweat and tears of frustration. "Jamie!" Her voice was a whip crack in the enclosed space. He spun around, guilt and defiance warring on his face. "Clara, go back. I am handling this. Mr. Crowder said he would take a new horse for the debt. This one is wild." Crowder said, she repeated, the blood draining from her face. "He sent you here." Before he could answer, a shadow fell across the basin. Well now, look what the wind blew in. 3 men. They were not from Dry Creek. They were not ranchers. They were dressed in mismatched pieces of uniforms and stained hides. And they smelled of grease, stale whiskey, and something worse. The man in the lead had a face like a cracked boot, and a curtain of lank, dark hair fell over a missing ear. Their eyes, all 3 sets, were dead. Scalp hunters. "This here is a private spot, folks," the man said, a grin splitting his face, showing yellowed teeth. We was just about to have a drink. This is Whitfield land, Clara said. Her voice was shaking, but she held her ground. She pushed Jamie behind her. Land is just a word. Missy, the man said. He stepped closer, and she could see the grim, dark trophies braided into his horse's mane. This water, though, this is valuable, and we charge a toll for passing through. Jamie, emboldened by his sister's presence, suddenly raised the old rifle he had brought. You get out, you get off our land. The man moved faster than Clara thought possible. He did not even look at the rifle. He lunged and backhanded Jamie across the face. The blow sent the boy sprawling into the sand. The rifle discharged, the shot deafening in the small space, the bullet ricocheting harmlessly off the high canyon wall. Jamie Clara screamed and lunged for the fallen rifle. She was clumsy, frantic. She was not a fighter. One of the other men grabbed her by the arm, spinning her around. He held her easily, his fingers like a steel trap. She is a feisty one, the leader said. He pulled a long, glittering knife from his belt and tested the edge with his thumb. He looked at Clara, a slow, appraising look that stripped her bare. I am thinking the toll is not money. Clara froze. The air left her lungs. This was not debt. This was not land. This was the end of things. A single, sharp pebble clicked against the canyon wall, just above the man's head. That is enough. The voice was not loud, but it cut through the heavy air. Clara twisted her head. He was standing on a rock ledge about 10 feet up. He had not been there a second before. He was just there. He was dying. He wore simple linen trousers and a buckskin shirt, dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. A string of polished turquoise rested at the base of his throat. He held a short, unstrung bow in one hand. He was still, his face calm, his dark eyes missing nothing. He was watching the leader. This was the man from the rumors, the shadow rider, Ashki Yazi. The scalp hunter laughed. A dry, ugly sound. You lost. Chief, this is white folks' business. Get along before you get hurt. This is not your water, Ashki said. His English was perfect, each word placed with care. You are not welcome here. Leave, now. The leader's smile vanished. Or what you and that toy bow? Ashki did not move. He did not knock an arrow. He did not raise his voice. He simply waited, his presence a sudden, heavy weight in the basin. The other two men were looking at him, then at their leader, their confidence wavering. There was something in this man's stillness, a disciplined, patient readiness, that was more dangerous than a drawn pistol. This ain't worth the blood, the leader finally grunted. He shoved Clara, sending her stumbling against the rock wall. But we will be back, Missy. You can count on that. He pointed the knife at Ashki. And you, we will remember your face. They mounted their horses, their movements angry and sullen, and rode out of the basin, their curses lingering in the air. Clara sagged against the rock, gasping, her heart a wild bird in her chest. Jamie scrambled to his feet, his lips split and bleeding, and grabbed the rifle, before Clara could even form a word of thanks or fear. The sound of more horses echoed at the canyon mouth. Silas Crowder rode in, his face a mask of false concern, and with him, Sergeant Harlan and two blue-uniformed soldiers, their rifles held at the ready. My goodness, Crowder said, his voice dripping with oily satisfaction. He surveyed the scene. Clara, her hair torn from its pins, Jamie, bruised and holding a smoking rifle, and the still, watchful dying warrior standing above the sacred pool. Sergeant, Crowder said, turning to Harlan, it seems we have arrived just in time. Miss Whitfield, consorting with a known renegade, and on the very land she is about to forfeit. What a pity. That is a lie, Clara cried, her voice raw. They were scalp hunters. They attacked us. He saved us. Harlan's eyes were as cold and flat as a stone. What men? Miss Whitfield, I see you, your brother, and an Indian trespasser. I see a rifle that has been fired. She is unhinged. Sergeant, Crowder said, sighing. The debt, the stress, it is all too much for her. And now she is in league with them. Did you hear her? He saved us. They are plotting, probably trying to steal the water. He is protecting the water, Clara shouted. Desperate. It is all he did. She admits it, Crowder announced, as if to a jury. She is conspiring with him against the town, against the United States Army. Harlan unholstered his heavy pistol and aimed it at Ashki. You, on the rock. You are under arrest for trespassing, and she is under arrest for conspiracy. Both of you will come with me. You cannot, Ashki said. His voice was still quiet, but a new, hard edge had entered it. He stepped down from the ledge, landing silently on the sand. She is not with me, and you are not taking this water. That is one more word than I asked for, Harlan said, thumbing back the hammer. No! Clara lurched forward, planting herself between the soldier's pistol and the warrior's chest. Her body was trembling so hard she could barely stand, but her conviction was granite. If you shoot him, you will have to shoot me. This is wrong. Crowder laughed. A short, sharp bark. Bravo, Miss Whitfield. Such loyalty to your new friends. This will make my foreclosure all the easier. Wait, Ashki said. His eyes were not on Harlan or Crowder. They were on Clara. He saw the trap closing. He saw the soldier's rigid certainty, the merchant's cunning. He saw the end. If you take her, he said to Harlan, his voice reasonable, this man will take her land. Her brother will have nothing. If you shoot me, my people will see it as an act of war. You will have a fight. He turned his gaze fully on Clara. There is another way. You will come with me to my people. As a guest, we will speak with the elders. It is our way. A negotiation. She will be safe. I will give my word. What? Clara whispered, turning to stare at him. Go with you. Absolutely not, Harlan snapped. She is a citizen. A citizen you have accused of treason, Ashki said. This is better than a jail cell or a war. Let her come. We will send her back when we have an agreement, when you agree to leave this spring in peace. He wants to take her hostage, Crowder yelped, his eyes bright with excitement. This was better than he had planned. A guest, Ashki repeated, his voice firm. He looked at Clara. Under my protection. Clara's mind was spinning. Jail, lost land, war, or this, going with this strange, quiet man who had saved her life and was now, what, capturing her? Jamie, she said, her voice dropping, a sudden, cold calm falling over her. When I move, you run. Run up the rocks, the way we came. Do not stop. Go home. Get Pa. Find Reverend Pike. Tell him what happened. Tell him Crowder and Harlan did this. Jamie's eyes were wide with terror. Now, Clara, she hissed. She shoved him toward the rock face. Go. For 1 second, Jamie hesitated. Then he was gone, scrambling up the rocks like a mountain goat. Get the boy, Harlan roared, raising his pistol. You will never find him in those rocks, Ashki said calmly. But I will. After we talk, I will find him. I will bring him to your ranch. Safe. You have my word. Harlan swore, his face purple. He knew the warrior was right. 2 days, Harlan growled. You have 2 days to return her. Then we come in, and we will not be gentle. Ashki nodded once, a sharp, definite movement. He looked at Clara. He did not hold out a hand. He did not make a move toward her. He simply gestured with his head toward the deeper canyon. Clara felt a wave of dizzying, terrified rage. She had been forced. By Crowder, by Harlan, by Jamie's foolishness, and now by this man. As she stepped forward, her foot slipped on the damp earth at the edge of the pool. She put a hand down to steady herself. Her fingers sank into the mud. But beneath the thin layer of mud, she felt it, a clear, sharp impression. It was not her boot print. It was not Jamie's. It was not the soft shape of a moccasin. It was the unmistakable waffle pattern of a United States Army issue boot, complete with a small circle of the heel plate. It was deep. It was fresh. A soldier had been here, standing right here, before them, before the scalp hunters. This was not a chance encounter. This was a trap. Harlan had known about this water all along. A cold so profound it stopped her breath washed over her. She looked up. Ashki Yazi was waiting, his face impassive. He was her savior, and he was her captor. She pulled her hand from the mud, wiping the grit on her skirt. She stood up straight, her shoulders back, and walked past him, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She looked one last time at the spring. The water was so bright, so clear. She could see every colored pebble on the bottom, but she could not see how deep it was. She was in it now. "This way," Ashki Yazi said. He turned and began to walk, his stride smooth and silent, into the heart of the canyons. He did not look back. Clara Whitfield, with no choice left at all, followed him. The walk was not long, but it was a journey into a world Clara had never known. Ashki Yazi moved with a ground-eating stride that was not a run, yet she had to half-jog to keep up. He did not speak. He did not touch her. He did not look back. He was simply a force moving forward, and she was the object being pulled in his wake. They left the narrow slit canyon and entered a maze of high-walled, red rock passages. The trail was invisible to her. She would have said it was impassable. He led her up sheer faces of slick rock, pointing out toeholds she could barely see. He never offered a hand. He waited, patient, as she scrambled, her skirt catching on brush, her hands raw and bleeding. Her rage and fear settled into a hard, dense core of exhaustion. After what felt like hours, the landscape opened up. They stood on the rim of a wide, shallow mesa. Below them, protected from the wind by a high crescent of sandstone, was a small settlement. It was nothing like Dry Creek. There were no false-fronted buildings, no straight lines, no saloon noise. There were only low, dome-shaped structures made of earth and wood. The Hogans. They looked like they had grown from the ground itself. A few columns of smoke, smelling impossibly clean and sharp with the scent of cedar, rose into the deep blue sky. Sheep, different from her own, with long, shaggy coats, grazed in a nearby pasture fenced with dry brush. A woman sat outside one of the hogans, working at a large loom, her hands a blur of motion, weaving a pattern of red and black. Children stopped their play, their dark eyes wide and silent, as Ashki led Clara into the center of the camp. An old man emerged from the largest hogan. His face was a map of a long and difficult life, his white hair tied back with a simple leather thong. He was not tall, but his presence was immense. He looked at Ashki, and then his eyes settled on Clara. They were not unkind, but they were deeply, profoundly weary. He had seen this all before. "This must be Chibanali, the elder." Ashki spoke. His voice, now in his own language, was different. It was still calm, but it held a new music, a flow of respect and explanation. He spoke for a long time, gesturing not at Clara, but toward the direction of the spring, and toward Dry Creek. The old man, Chibanali, listened. He did not interrupt. His eyes never left Clara's face. She felt herself being weighed, measured, and perhaps found wanting. She stood straight, though her knees were trembling. She tried to look like what she was, a terrified, angry woman. Not a conspirator, not a whore, not a victim. She was just Clara Whitfield, and she was in a place she did not belong. When Ashki finished, the old man nodded slowly. He spoke, his voice a low rumble, like rocks moving at the bottom of a river. Ashki's face remained impassive. "What is he saying?" Clara demanded, her voice sounding too loud, too shrill. Ashki turned to her. "He understands. He knows Silas Crowder. He knows Sergeant Harlan. He says they are men who feed on trouble, Then you must let me go, Clara said, taking a step forward. This was all a mistake. Jamie, my brother, he was foolish. If you just let me go, I can talk to Reverend Pike. He is a good man. He will listen. Let you go, Ashki said, his voice flat. To where Sergeant Harlan is waiting, he will say you were a prisoner. He will say his accusations are true. Crowder will say you are ruined. Your land will be gone by morning. What are you saying? She whispered, the cold dread returning. He is saying, Chibanali said, stepping forward, his English slow but clear, that the white man needs a story. Crowder and Harlan have their story. They say we are savages. They say we have stolen a white woman. They will use this story to bring soldiers. They will use the soldiers to take the spring. And then they will take the land. Clara stared at him, her mind unable to move. They will not. I will tell them the truth. Your truth does not matter, the old man said. Not unkindly. Their story is stronger, unless we give them a different story, a different law. Ashki looked down at his feet as if in discomfort. What law? Clara asked, her throat tight. Chi Banali looked at Ashki and then back at her. You were found with him at the spring. He has brought you here, to his home, his family. In our way, this has meaning. If you are a guest, they will say you are a prisoner. If you are a relative, they cannot. Clara's blood went cold. What do you mean, relative? Ashki finally spoke, his voice strained. He is proposing a marriage, in name only. The world tilted. The cedar smoke smelled suddenly choking. The blue sky seemed to press down on her. A marriage, she repeated, her voice a hollow echo. It is a shield, Chibanali said quickly, seeing the pure, unadulterated horror on her face. It is a protection. For you, for us, it is a paper, a law. It stops Harlan. He cannot rescue a married woman from her husband. He cannot rescue a woman who is not being held. It is a marriage of name. Nothing more. Nothing more, Clara choked out, laughing, a wild, hysterical sound that startled a nearby dog. You want me to marry him? This is insane. It is a sin. I am a Christian woman. I will not. I cannot. She was trapped. This was a deeper, darker, more twisted version of the trap Harlan and Crowder had set. She was being forced to save her land, forced to save this village, forced by a circumstance so monstrous she could not even see all its edges. Her mind flashed to her Puritan upbringing, to the simple, stark lines of right and wrong. This was wrong. This was a defilement, a living lie. She backed away, shaking her head, her hands coming up as if to ward off a blow. No, I will not. I will not be touched. I will not be used like this. The old man sighed, his shoulders slumping. He saw the impasse. I will not touch you if you do not wish it. Clara's head snapped up. It was Ashki. He had not moved, but his voice was a raw, binding thing in the quiet air. He was looking at her, his eyes holding hers. And there was no deceit in them. There was only a quiet, terrible gravity. This is a lie, she whispered, appealing to him. You know it is. It is a story, he said. Their story is a lie that kills. This story is a lie that protects. I will say the words. You will say the words. You will be safe from them. You will be safe from me. He paused. I give you my word. I will not touch you. It was a vow. She knew it. In her bones. It was the only solid thing she had touched all day. A woman, older, with a kind, wrinkled face and eyes like Ashki's, stepped forward. She held out a heavy, beautifully woven blanket. She offered it to Clara. Clara looked at the blanket, then at the woman, then at Ashki. Her hands were shaking. She did not take it. A new voice, hard and angry, cut through the quiet. A young man, built as strong as Ashki but with none of his calm, stepped forward. He was dressed in leathers. and his face was a mask of suspicion. He spat on the ground near Clara's feet. "This is a mistake, old man," he said in rough English, ignoring Ashki and glaring at Chibanali. "She is a white woman. She is poison. She has been here an hour, and you already talk of giving her our name. She will bring the soldiers. She will be our death." "Nakai," Ashki said, his voice quiet but full of iron. "Be silent." "I will not be silent," Nakai shot back. "You bring this bad luck into our homes. And for what? A false paper, they will come anyway. We should fight them, not hide behind her skirt." Before Chibanali could respond, a new figure appeared. A young boy, breathless from running, sprinted into the clearing. He ran to Ashki and spoke in a rapid, panicked tumble of dying. Ashki's face darkened. For the first time, Clara saw a flicker of rage in his eyes. "What is it?" she asked. Ashki looked at her, and the gravity of their situation settled on her like a physical weight. "It is, as the elder said. Crowder is in Dry Creek. He has told everyone that you were taken, kidnapped, stolen by the Shadow Rider. He says you are being held against your will. Sergeant Harlan has used his authority to muster the patrol. He says he is coming to rescue you. With guns. So it does not matter," Nakai said with a sneer. "The paper will not stop bullets." "No," Chibanali said, his voice regaining its strength. "But it may stop the ones who are not soldiers." He held up a hand. "Harlan and Crowder are one problem. The town is another. If the town believes this lie, they will support the attack. If they have doubt, they will not." He looked at Ashki. "Send the messenger, not to Harlan. Send him to the judge. Send him to the man of God. Pike, invite them here. Tomorrow. Let them see the kidnapped woman. Let them be our witnesses." "It is a trap," Nakai said. "They will come with soldiers." "Perhaps," Chibanali said. "But it is a move we must make. Go." As the messenger ran, Chibanali and Ashki stood together, speaking in low, urgent tones. Clara watched them, her mind numb. Nakai was still glaring at her, his hatred a palpable thing. She saw Ashki break from the conversation and walk to a small, sheltered alcove cut into the rock. It looked like a storage area. He bent down, looking at some bags piled there. Salt, she thought. It looked like a salt store. When he stood up, he held something in his open palm. He showed it to Chibanali. The old man's face went rigid. Clara could not see what it was from a distance, but she saw Ashki wipe his hand on his trousers. It left a dark smear, a streak of gray ash. The sign was clear. Ash in the salt. Someone had been there, someone who did not belong, someone who had left a deliberate, or perhaps careless, sign. An insider. A cold, new terror prickled down Clara's spine. The threat was not just Harlan and Crowder in Dry Creek. It was here, in the camp. Someone was feeding them information, the spring, and now, perhaps, her. The kind-faced woman approached her again, gently pushing the blanket into her numb hands. This time, Clara took it. The wool was soft and heavy. "You will stay in my daughter's hogan," the woman said, her voice soft. "She is not here. You will be safe." Safe. The word had lost all meaning. Clara was led to a small hogan. Inside, it was clean and simple. A small fire smoldered in the center, the smoke rising to the hole in the roof. She sat on a pile of furs, pulling the blanket around her. She was now, by some insane frontier logic, a bride. She was a prisoner, held by the man who had saved her life, to protect her from the men who were supposed to uphold the law. If she stayed, she was betraying her name, her faith, her people. She was living a lie that made her stomach turn. But if she ran, if she fled, and Harlan found her, he would have his proof. He would say she had escaped. He would have his justification. He would ride into this camp. He would kill Nakai. He would kill Ashki. He would kill the kind woman, and the old man, and the children who had stared at her with such quiet curiosity. She looked at her hands, still raw from the climb. She was caught. She was the fuse, and the match had already been struck. Her only choice was to not move, to stay, and to be the lie, to stand between the two worlds, and to stop them from colliding. She pulled the heavy, strange blanket tighter. The wool smelled of cedar and smoke, and a world she did not understand, but it was warm. The first morning in the hogan was a lesson in silence. Clara awoke, not to the frantic crowing of a rooster or the demands of the ranch, but to the soft, rhythmic scrape of wood on wood. She had slept fitfully on the pile of furs, the heavy blanket a strange comfort, the cedar-scented smoke a constant, unfamiliar perfume. She had realized with a jolt in the night, a married woman. The thought was so absurd, so grotesque, that she had almost laughed. A marriage in name only, a shield, but it felt like a cage. She sat up. The older woman who had given her the blanket was already at work, grinding corn with a stone in a slow, patient circle. The woman's name, Clara had learned, was Sani. She was Ashki's mother. She smiled at Clara, a smile that did not hide the worry in her eyes, and gestured to a bowl of water and a strip of dried meat. Clara washed her face. The water was cold, precious. She ate the meat. It was tough, smoky, and satisfying. She watched Sani's hands. They were strong, gnarled, and endlessly busy. For the first 2 days, Clara was a ghost. She was watched by everyone, but spoken to by almost no one. The men, led by Ashki and Chibanali, were in constant, low-voiced conferences. They were scouting, watching the canyon entrances, waiting for the messengers sent to Dry Creek. The tension was a high, thin wire humming just beneath the sounds of the camp. The children were curious, but wary. They would watch her, silent, and scatter if she turned her head too quickly. Only Nakai, the angry warrior, was open in his hostility. He would walk past the hogan where she stayed, his eyes burning with contempt. He said nothing to her, but his presence was an insult. Clara, a woman built for work, could not bear the idleness. The waiting was a different kind of prison. On the 3rd morning, she saw her chance. Sani and another woman were sorting a massive pile of wool from the strange, long-haired sheep. Clara knew wool. She stepped out of the hogan. She pointed at the wool. "I can help." Sani looked at her, surprised. Clara did not wait for an answer. She sat, her skirt settling in the dust, and picked up a handful of the wool. It was greasy, full of burrs. She began to clean it, her fingers moving with the quick, practiced efficiency of a lifetime of the same work. Sani watched her for a full minute, then nodded once and sat beside her. They worked in silence, the pile of dirty wool shrinking, the pile of clean, carded fleece growing. Later that day, she saw one of the weavers, the woman from the large loom, staring at a massive, half-finished tapestry. A section of the border had been torn, as if a dog had pulled at it. The woman was clicking her tongue, her face a mask of frustration. Clara had, in the deep pocket of her riding skirt, a small sewing kit. It was her one vanity. A small tin box with 3 good needles, a spool of black thread, and one of white. She had carried it for mending her own clothes, her father's shirts, Jamie's torn trousers. She went to the woman. She pointed at the tear, and then held up the tin box. The woman's eyes widened. Clara pulled out a needle and the black thread. She sat. She did not ask permission, but her gesture was one of offering. The woman stepped aside, her arms crossed, watching. Clara's hands, chapped and rough from ranch work, were transformed. The needle was a part of her. She did not just patch the hole. She rewove the torn threads, her stitches so small and precise that they mimicked the loom's work. It took her an hour. When she was done, the tear was gone, the pattern restored, the strength of the edge returned. The weaver stared, then reached out and touched the mended spot. She looked at Clara, and for the first time, someone smiled at her without pity or fear. The woman spoke a single, soft word. "Hey," Sani said from behind her. Clara turned. "What does that mean?" "It means, thank you," Sani said. She held out her hand, not to Clara, but to a small boy who had been hiding behind her. The boy's hand was wrapped in a dirty rag, and he was trying not to cry. Sani spoke in Dain, her voice gentle. The boy stubbornly held his hand behind his back. "He fell on the rocks," Sani said to Clara. "He has a bad cut, and it is full of dirt." Clara looked at the boy. She knelt, so she was at his eye level. She did not reach for him. She simply looked at him, her face as calm as she could make it. She remembered the near hysteria of the scalp hunters, and pushed it down. She was practical. This was a practical problem. She turned to Sani. "I need clean water, and soap, if you have it, or salt, and a clean rag." Sani, seeing the no-nonsense competence in her, relayed the orders. The items appeared. Clara cleaned her own hands first, scrubbing them with the harsh lye soap until her skin burned. She held out her hands to the boy. He still hesitated. Ashki's voice, quiet, made them all turn. He had been watching, unseen. From the shadow of the horse pen, he spoke to the boy in their language, his voice low and reassuring. The boy, his eyes wide, slowly, put his wounded hand in Clara's. She was gentle. She soaked the dirty rag away. The cut was deep, a jagged, ugly slice across his palm, filled with sand and grit. The boy hissed in pain, but he did not pull away. "This will hurt," Clara said softly, to the boy, "but it will be fast." She poured a small stream of the precious, clean water over the wound, washing the worst of the grit away. Then she took a pinch of salt and pressed it firmly into the cut. The boy screamed, a sharp, sudden cry, and tried to snatch his hand back. Clara held on, her grip firm but not cruel, her other hand on his shoulder. Ashki knelt beside her, speaking again, not to the boy, but to her. "Hold the pressure. It cleans. It is good." She held it, her own heart pounding, until the boy's sobs subsided. Then she took the clean strip of linen Sani offered and bound the hand, tight and neat. She released him. The boy stared at his bandaged hand, then at her, and then he bolted, running to his mother, who had been watching from afar. Clara let out a breath she did not know she was holding. She stood up, her knees aching. "You have a healer's hands," Ashki said. He was standing close, closer than he had ever been. "I have a mender's hands," Clara said, wiping her own on her skirt. "I mend what is broken. Fences, blankets, children." She looked at him. "What about you?" He did not answer. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. That night, the camp was uneasy. The messengers had not returned from Dry Creek. There was no word from the judge, no sign of Reverend Pike. Shi Benali sat by the central fire. He began to tell a story. It was not for her, she knew, but for his own people, to calm them. He spoke of the coyote, the great trickster. He told of how Coyote was hungry, and he went to the prairie dog town. He told them a great flood was coming, and he would save them, but only if they all went into a deep hole he had dug. The prairie dogs, trusting and foolish, had agreed. Coyote had sealed the hole and had a feast. Clara listened, her skin crawling. She did not need to understand the language. She understood the meaning. Silas Crowder was the coyote, and she and Jamie, and perhaps all of Dry Creek were the prairie dogs. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain, not the scouring dust, but real, deep water. The air grew heavy, charged. Clara stood from the fire, walking to the edge of the mesa rim, looking out into the vast, dark territory. She missed her home. She missed her father. She missed her awful, broken, predictable life. She heard a footstep on the rock behind her. It was Ashki. He did not speak, but gestured with his head up toward the high point of the mesa that sheltered the camp. She did not know why, but she followed him. The climb was steep, and he pointed out the holds, just as he had before. But this time, when she slipped on a loose piece of gravel, his hand shot out. He did not grab her. He held his hand open, flat, a solid piece of rock for her to press against to regain her balance. She pressed her palm against his. His hand was warm, hard, and steady. The touch was brief, impersonal, and it sent a shock through her entire body. They reached the top. The view was staggering. The world was laid out below them, a sea of black rock and silvered brush under a sky thick with clouds. Far to the south, a line of lightning, silent and blue, lit the clouds from within. A storm, far away, watching them. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "It is water," he said. "It is life. It is moving toward the spring." They stood in silence, watching the distant, silent fire in the sky. Their arms were not touching. Their bodies were a respectable distance apart. But their hands, resting on the same flat boulder between them, were only inches apart. She could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, or maybe it was her own. He did not move closer. She did not move away. They just watched the rain, together. A runner appeared from the darkness below, scrambling up the path. He was not one of the messengers sent to town. He was a scout. He was breathing hard, and he carried a small, folded piece of paper. He gave it to Ashki. Ashki opened it. He did not have to read it in the dark. He had been told what it said. "What is it?" Clara asked, her throat suddenly dry. "It is from your brother," he said. "Jamie!" She lunged for the paper, but he held it out of her reach, his face grim. "He got it to a trader, one of our cousins, who he trusts. He says Crowder has posted a new deed. He says it is a foreclosure. He says Sergeant Harlan has signed it, as the law, because the circuit judge is gone." Clara's world, which had been tilting, suddenly snapped into a cold, hard focus. The boot print, the ash in the salt, the trap at the spring, the scalp hunters, who had just been a diversion, the fake deed. It was all one thing. It was a single, elegant, evil plan. "He is lying," she said, her voice a low, cold thread. "Our father's signature. He must have faked it." "He has posted the sale for tomorrow, at noon," Ashki said. "Your land will be gone." Clara turned from the storm. She looked at Ashki, at the runner, at the camp below. She saw the women, the children, the old men. She saw Sani's kind hands and Nakai's hateful eyes. Her choice, which had been a fog of confusion, was now as clear and sharp as a shard of glass. She started down the path. "Where are you going?" Ashki asked, following her. "To the fire," she said, her voice ringing with a new, hard authority that surprised them both. "I am going to talk to Chibanali. I am going back to Dry Creek. I am going to face Silas Crowder. And I am going to do it without getting all of you killed." Clara strode to the fire, the letter from her brother a burning coal in her hand. Chibanali and the other elders looked up as she approached. Ashki was already there, his face carved from shadow. "He is stealing my land?" Clara said, her voice not loud, but it cut through the night air. There was no tremor in it. "Crowder has faked my father's signature on a new deed. He is holding a foreclosure sale tomorrow at noon. Harlan is his witness." She held out the crumpled paper to Chibanali. "This is the proof. This is his plan. The water, the kidnapping." It was all a lie to get me out of the way so he could steal the ranch. Chi took the paper, though he could not read the words. He understood the meaning. "I am going back," Clara stated. It was not a request. Before the old man could reply, there was a commotion at the edge of the camp. Two men stumbled into the firelight, exhausted, their clothes torn. They were the messengers sent to Dry Creek, the ones who had gone to find Reverend Pike and the circuit judge. They almost fell. Sani rushed to give them water. They laughed. The first messenger said, his voice a hoarse rasp. He looked at Chi. The town is drunk on fear. Crowder has told them all the woman was stolen. Harlan backs him. And Pike Ashki asked, his voice sharp. Pike is a mouse, the second messenger said, wiping his mouth. He is afraid. He stays in his church and locks the door. The judge is gone. Harlan said he was called away to the territory capital. Harlan is the law now. The first messenger looked at Clara, then at Ashki. That is not the worst. We listened. In the saloon. Crowder and Harlan. They are planning the rescue for tomorrow. The sale? Clara whispered. Yes, the man said, nodding. They will hold the sale. They know you will come to stop it. And when you do, they will rescue you. And if our people try to help, they will call it an attack. Harlan has his patrol ready. They are waiting at the edge of town. They want a war. The word fell into the fire and was consumed. Nakai, who had been watching from the darkness, stepped into the light. His face was a mask of pure, vindicated fury. So, it is here, Nakai said, his voice a low growl. He looked at Chibanali. You see, old man, your paper walls, your marriage, your talking, it is weakness. They want war. They plan to kill us for water they do not even own. We will give them war. He turned to the other young warriors, his voice rising. We will ride, now, before the sun. We will hit them before they are ready. We will burn the town. We will take the spring and we will keep it with our blood. A murmur of agreement rose. Several men stood up, reaching for their weapons. No Chibanali roared. He was on his feet faster than Clara thought possible, his old eyes blazing. You will not, you are a fool. Nakai, you are the coyote. You will lead us all into the trap. That is what they want. They want you to attack. They are waiting for you. You will give them the excuse they need to bring the entire army down on us. You will be the reason our children are slaughtered. Nakai hesitated, his hand on his knife. He was shamed by the elder, but still burning. He is right, Clara said, her voice clear and cold. Everyone turned to look at her. She looked at Nakai. He is right. They want you. They want a savage they can shoot. They are using me as the excuse. Do not give them what they want. She turned back to Chi. The deed is a lie. That is the heart of it. Not the kidnapping, not the water, the fraud. I know Crowder. He is a greedy, careful man. He must have kept his old ledgers, the ones with the real numbers. He keeps 2 sets of books. I have always known it. He would need a seal to make the deed look real, a state seal. He must have a fake one. She was thinking aloud now, the pieces clicking into place. If I can prove the fraud, Harlan has no legal ground. The sale is a lie. The whole town will see it. She looked at Chi. Reverend Pike, he is a weak man, as your messenger said, but he is not a liar. He witnessed the original loan with my father. He knows the real numbers. He is my only chance. Chi Banali looked at her for a long, heavy minute. The fire crackled. The wind was rising. You are asking to walk into the trap. I am the bait, Clara said. They are building the trap for me. I intend to be the one who springs it. The old man nodded. A slow, terrible understanding passing between them. This is a fire you must walk through alone. If you go as Clara Whitfield. You do not go as the wife of Ashki. You do not go as our ally. You cannot bring this army to our Hogans. I understand, she said, her throat tight. I go alone. No. The word was absolute. It came from Ashki. He had been silent, watching, his face a stone. Now, he stepped forward. It is death, he said, his voice low and for her alone. Harlan will not let you reach the town. The scalp hunters are with him. They are waiting. They will not bring you to trial. It is my family, Clara said, meeting his gaze. The heat from the fire was on one side of her face, the cold night on the other. It is my name. You gave me your word you would not touch me. You gave me your word I was a guest. You cannot keep me." His eyes held hers. She saw the argument in them, the command, the fierce, protective instinct, and she saw him, with a visible effort, master it. He respected the line. He would not cross it. "I respect your choice," he said, his voice strained. "But I will not let you walk to your death. You will not reach the town alone. I will take you. I will guide you past his scouts. I will be your shadow. But, as the elder says, you must walk into the town by yourself." Nakai sneered. The great warrior, hiding in the dark while a woman fights his battles. Ashki turned his head, a slow, cold movement. A warrior knows which battle to fight. You would fight their battle. She is fighting hers. I will see that she gets there. Chibanali nodded. "It is settled. Go before the false dawn." They left 2 hours before sunrise. The world was black, the air heavy and thick. To the south, the storm that had been a distant promise was now a constant, silent flicker of lightning. It was closer. The air was electric. They did not take horses. They moved on foot, up trails Clara had not known existed, paths for goats and shadows. He moved silently, a ghost in the darkness, and she followed, her mended skirt catching on the rocks, her hands raw. They were in a narrow, high-walled pass, the blackness so total she had to put her hand on the rock to guide herself. The town was just a mile below. A shot. The sound was a flat, deafening crack. A spark of light leaped from the rocks above them, and the bullet screamed past Clara's head. Chipping stone. Down Ashki's voice was a command. He shoved her, hard, behind a bank of boulders. "Well, well," a voice echoed in the pass. "Sergeant Harlan, the loving couple, out for a morning stroll. I cannot let you spoil the party. Missy." Another shot, this one thudding into the rock in front of her. She saw movement in the rocks above. Harlan, on his horse, outlined against the pre-dawn sky, and with him, 2 soldiers, and a 4th man, on foot, moving down the rocks toward them. The man with the missing ear, the scalp hunter. "It is a good day for a rescue." Harlan laughed. "A shame you resisted." The scalp hunter was coming, his long knife gleaming in the lightning flashes. Ashki moved. He was not the calm, still man from the camp. He was a different being. He was motion. He did not have his bow. He pushed a small, sharp knife into Clara's hand. "Stay here." He went up the rock face, not away. He met the scalp hunter on a narrow ledge. The man lunged, expecting a cowering target. Ashki was not there. He used the man's own momentum, a brutal twist of the arm. Clara heard a wet, sickening crack, and the man screamed, his knife clattering into the darkness. A soldier above, spooked, fired. The shot went wide. Ashki did not pause. He grabbed the screaming man and used him as a shield, moving up toward the soldier. The soldier hesitated, his rifle wavering, not wanting to shoot his ally. That hesitation was all Ashki needed. He was on the soldier, a blur of motion. It was not a fight. It was a dismantling. The soldier was on the ground, his rifle gone, his arm bent at an angle it should not be. "Shoot them! Shoot them both!" Harlan roared, firing his pistol into the darkness. "Get out!" Ashki was suddenly beside her, grabbing her arm. "Now run!" He pulled her down the pass, toward the town. A bullet grazed his left arm, ripping the buckskin. He grunted, but he did not slow. He was pulling her, almost carrying her, his body shielding hers from the gunfire above. They ran, scrambling, falling, until they were out of the narrow pass and hidden in a deep arroyo thick with brush. They collapsed, hidden, breathing in ragged, painful gasps. The sky was turning a pale, sick gray. "You are hit," Clara whispered. She saw the blood, dark on his sleeve. She reached for him, her hands shaking, ripping a strip of cloth from her petticoat. He stilled her hand. his grip like iron. It is nothing. He was listening, his head tilted, scanning the ridge above them. He is gone. Harlan, he is riding back. He will be at the sale. He will be waiting. Clara stared at him. The man who had been her captor. The man who was her husband. He had just taken a bullet for her. He had fought 3 men. He had saved her. Again. The word forced was a meaningless, bitter piece of ash in her mouth. It was gone. She had watched him. He was terrifying. He was disciplined. He was, in that dark pass, the most beautiful and dangerous thing she had ever seen. He looked at her. The adrenaline was fading. He saw the look in her eyes. "I keep my word," he said, as if it explained everything. He led her the last half-mile, to the bluff that overlooked Dry Creek. The town was just waking up. Smoke rose from the chimney of the smithy. It looked small and fragile and full of lies. They stood, watching it. The sun was rising, red and angry. The lightning to the south was still there, a pale flicker against the growing light. The storm was coming. "He will be there," Ashki said. "Crowder will be there. The sale is the trap for you. The patrol is the trap for my people." "I know," Clara said. She looked down at the knife he had given her. She tucked it into the waistband of her skirt, hiding it with the folds of her blouse. "This is a mistake," he said, his voice raw. "It is my mistake to make," she replied. She looked at his arm. "That needs to be cleaned." "It will be," he said. He did not look at her. He looked at the town. "My shadow will be close, but I cannot step into the sun. Not unless they try to kill you." She nodded. She understood. She straightened her torn skirt. She tucked a loose strand of hair back into her bun. She was no longer the girl who had run the ranch. She was not the frightened prisoner. She was Clara Whitfield, and she was going to get her land back. She began to walk down the gentle slope, toward the main street of Dry Creek, alone. Dry Creek was awake, but not in a good way. It was the hush of a town holding its breath, waiting for the lightning to strike. As Clara walked down the slope, her back straight, she felt the eyes. They were in the alleys, behind the curtains of the assay office, from the balcony of the saloon. The town was not gathering for a sale. It was gathering for a hanging. She kept walking, her boots making small, solitary sounds in the thick dust. Her gaze was fixed on the mercantile. A platform had been built. Not a gallows, but close. A simple wooden stage, standing in front of the wide porch of Crowder's store. On it stood Silas Crowder himself, dressed in his Sunday best, a black string tie tight around his thick neck. Beside him stood Sergeant Harlan, his blue uniform pressed, his holster polished, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. Crowder was holding a piece of paper, the deed. Below the platform, she saw them. Her father, Abel Whitfield, was standing by a post, his shoulders slumped, his face a gray, slack mask of defeat. And beside him, his hands tied loosely in front of him, was Jamie. Clara's heart stopped, then restarted with a painful, lurching beat. They had him. They had her brother. This was not a foreclosure. This was an execution. "It seems," Silas Crowder's voice boomed, oily and loud, "that we have a late arrival." He pointed at Clara. Every head in the street turned. A murmur went through the crowd, a sound like dry leaves skittering. She was a sight. Her hair was loose, her skirt was torn and stained with rock, dust, and blood. Ashki's blood. "Clara!" Jamie screamed. Harlan's hand shot out and clamped over the boy's mouth, muffling the cry. "My dear child," Crowder said, his voice dripping with false pity. "Look at you, ravaged, torn, a victim of this terrible wilderness. We were just settling your poor, indebted father's affairs." "You are a liar," Clara said. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear. The crowd went utterly silent. She did not stop walking until she was at the foot of the platform, standing between her family and the men who were destroying it. "That deed," she said, pointing at the paper in his hand, is a fraud. Crowder laughed, a high, nervous sound. Grief, gentlemen, a woman's hysteria. It is a sad thing to see. I have seen my father's signature on the real loan, Clara continued, her voice rising, gaining strength. I have seen his seal. That is not it. The curve of the W is wrong. The eagle's wing is too low. A few men in the crowd, men who had signed papers with her father, looked at each other. They knew her eye for detail. And your books, Mr. Crowder, she said, her eyes finding his. Your 2 sets of books, the one you show the territory inspector, and the one you keep under the floorboard of your office, the one that shows the real debt, the one that shows my father has paid, in wool and interest, more than 80% of what he owed. Crowder's face went from pale to a deep, mottled red. This is slander. This is treasonous talk. Is it? Clara scanned the crowd. She saw him, Reverend Pike, his face as white as his collar, trying to blend in with the wall of the church, 50 yards away. Reverend Pike, she called out. The man flinched, as if she had struck him. You were there. You witnessed the original loan. You sat at our table. You know my father's signature. You know the amount. Tell them, Reverend. Tell them the truth. Harlan turned his head, just slightly, and stared at Pike. He did not raise his gun. He did not have to. His eyes were a promise of violence. Pike looked at Clara, his face a portrait of agony. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked at Harlan, and he visibly shrank, pressing himself back against the holy, useless wood of the church. You see, Crowder said, his confidence returning. The woman is mad, delirious, and we all know why. Do we not, Sergeant? Harlan stepped forward, his voice the crack of a whip. She is not herself. She was taken, kidnapped, days ago, by the Navajo renegade, Ashki Yazi. The crowd gasped. This was the story they had been fed. This was the name they feared. She was held in his camp, Harlan boomed, his voice full of righteous, theatrical fury. She was forced into a heathen marriage defiled by a savage. She is a victim, and we are here to rescue her. We are here to bring justice to the animal who did this. Justice, a man shouted from the saloon door. Kill the savage, another yelled. The crowd was a single, hungry animal, turning, its many eyes fixing on Clara. She was no longer a neighbor. She was a ruined thing. She was not forced. The voice was not loud. It came from the alley beside the smithy. It was quiet, clear, and absolute. Ashki Yazi stepped into the sunlight. He was alone. He was not dressed for war. He wore his simple shirt and trousers. His left arm, the buckskin sleeve dark with dried blood, was held stiffly at his side. In his right hand, he held his small, unstrung bow. He looked like a traveler, not a warrior. He walked into the center of the street, placing himself between Clara and the crowd, near Reverend Pike's church. The town went silent, a new, deeper silence. This was not a rumor. This was the shadow rider, in the flesh. She was not forced. He repeated. He looked at Harlan. She was protected. From you, and from the scalp hunters you hired. He turned his calm, dark eyes to the crowd. The marriage was a shield, a name, to stop Harlan from claiming she was a conspirator. I have never laid a hand on her against her will. I gave my word. She gave hers. He looked at Pike. Reverend, you are a man of God. I ask you, is a lie that saves a life a greater sin than a truth that kills? The crowd was frozen. They did not know what to believe. Harlan, a soldier, a man of law, or this quiet, imposing man who spoke better English than most of them. He is lying, Crowder shrieked, his panic total. He had lost the crowd. He looked at Harlan. He is the renegade. He is here, Sergeant. Your duty. Arrest him. Shoot him. A young soldier, barely old enough to shave, was standing near the platform. His face was white, his hands trembling. He raised his rifle, aiming it at Ashki. Reverend Pike, his face suddenly full of a terrible, clear resolve, stepped away from the church wall. No, this is not the law. This is murder. This is not God's way. He started to walk toward Ashki, his hand held out as if to stop the bullet. Get out of the way, old man, the soldier yelled, his voice cracking. He fired. It happened in a single, fluid motion. Ashki did not run. He did not duck. He lunged forward, his right arm a blur, grabbing the front of Pike's robes, pulling the old man down, twisting his own body to shield him. The bullet went wide, screaming past them and shattering the front window of the mercantile in a spray of glass. For 1 second, there was silence, the shot, the breaking glass. Then, chaos. A woman screamed. Men shouted, diving for cover. Clara, seeing the shot, seeing Ashki cover Pike, acted. Her mind was a cold, clear bell. The signal. She turned and ran, not away, but to the church. She grabbed the thick, dusty bell rope and hauled on it with all her weight. The first deafening bong of the iron bell cut through the air. A warning, a call, a signal to the village that the trap had been sprung. She pulled again. Bong! The sound was answered by a new one. A high, terrible cry. A war whoop. Nakai Ashki roared, pushing a stunned Pike toward the church. 4 Dine warriors, led by Nakai, burst from the north end of the street. They were on horseback, their faces painted, their rifles raised. They had disobeyed. They had come for war. This was it, the massacre! See, Harlan bellowed, his face alight with triumph. An attack, an invasion, soldiers! To me form a line, fire at will! The soldiers, confused but obedient, scrambled to form a ragged line. Nakai raised his rifle, aiming it straight at Harlan. Stop! The voice was not a shout. It was a command. Chi Benali rode into the center of the street on a single, old mule. He rode between the soldiers' rifles and Nakai's war party. He raised one, thin, old hand. The authority of the man, the sheer, unbelievable audacity of his courage, stopped everyone. Nakai lowered his rifle, his face a mask of confusion and shame. Harlan's soldiers hesitated, their fingers on their triggers. This is madness, Chi said, his voice quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the street. He looked at Harlan. You have wounded. He gestured at Pike, who was shaking, and at Ashki, whose arm was now bleeding freely, the dark blood dripping onto the dust. We have wounded. Let us take our wounded and leave. Let the talking stop the bullets. This is not the day for dying. Harlan was trapped. The entire town was watching. They had seen him try to shoot an unarmed man. They had seen his soldier fire on a preacher. They had seen this old man ride for peace. Fine, Harlan growled, his voice a low, vicious thing. Take your wounded, take your husband, and get out. This land is forfeit, and this is not over. Chi nodded. A single, grave movement. He looked at Ashki. He looked at Nakai. We go. Ashki moved to Clara, who was still standing by the church door, her hand on the bell rope. His eyes were dark with a pain that was not from his arm. Come, he said. It is time to leave. Jamie, Clara breathed. She looked wildly around. My brother Pa. She ran toward the platform. Jamie! Jamie, who had been forgotten in the chaos, ran to meet her. Clara, I am so sorry, Get him! Harlan's voice was a steel whip. 2 soldiers, who had circled behind the church, grabbed Jamie. They were on him before Ashki could move. Before Clara could scream, they dragged him, kicking, back to the platform. One of the soldiers pressed the barrel of his pistol to Jamie's temple. The street went silent again. The trap, Ashki said, his voice a whisper of death. Harlan smiled, his good humor completely restored. He looked at Chi Benali. A change of plans. Old man, Harlan said, his voice pleasant. You want to leave fine. You leave the boy. A down payment, or a trade. He pointed, not at Clara, but at Ashki, the spring, your sacred spring. You tell us where the real source is. You give us the water. For the boy's life. The crack of the pistol against Jamie's head was a flat, dead sound. The soldier's blow was not meant to kill, just to control. Jamie slumped, not unconscious, but stunned. The water, Harlan said, his voice level. For the boy. Do not move, Ashki murmured to Clara. He was looking at Nakai. He was looking at Chi. He was calculating the distance, the number of rifles, the angles, and then, as if summoned by the violence, the sky tore open. It was not a drizzle. It was a deluge. The storm that had been flickering to the south for 2 days arrived in a single, solid sheet of cold, driving rain, in 1 second. The dusty street was a river of mud. The world vanished behind a gray curtain. Now Ashki roared. It was the signal, but it was not for Nakai. It was for Chi. The old man kicked his mule and yelled, a high, startling cry, driving his animal directly at Harlan's horse. At the same time, Nakai, understanding the feint, screamed his war cry and charged, not at Harlan, but at the 2 soldiers holding Jamie. It was perfect, beautiful chaos. Harlan's horse reared, screaming, as the old man on the mule charged him. Harlan fired his pistol, but the shot went wild into the air. Clara, the boy, get the boy, Ashki yelled. He was not running with her. He was running toward Harlan. He grabbed the soldier who had fired the shot at Pike, the one with the trembling hands, and threw him bodily into another soldier, using the confusion to create a wall of bodies. Clara ran. She slid in the mud, her boots finding no purchase. She saw Nakai leap from his horse, his knife out, not to kill, but to cut. He slashed the ropes on Jamie's hands. Go, Nakai roared at her, shoving Jamie into her arms. Go, I will hold them. He turned, his face a mask of joyous, redeemed fury, and met the charge of the remaining soldier. Clara, this way, Ashki was at her side, his arm bleeding, his face grim. He had Jamie by one arm, Clara by the other, and he pulled them, hard, into the narrow alley between the mercantile and the smithy. Stop them! Harlan was screaming, his voice swallowed by the thunder. Do not let them escape! Shoot, shoot! Bullets slapped into the mud where they had been. They ran, scrambling, falling, through the back alleys of Dry Creek. The rain was a blessing. It was a wall. It was a shield. No one could see. No one could aim. Clara looked back once. She saw Harlan, on foot, his face a mask of pure hatred, followed by 2 of his men, running, pursuing them. She also saw, in a flash of lightning, Silas Crowder. He was not with Harlan. He was not running toward the fight. He was slinking, low and fast, in the other direction, toward the church, toward Reverend Pike. He is going to kill him, she gasped. Crowder, he is going to kill Pike. We cannot help him now, Ashki said, his voice harsh. He pulled her into the maze of arroyos and washes that surrounded the town. We must help ourselves. They ran for what felt like an hour, the world a gray, streaming, liquid thing. The ground was slick, the red mud clinging to their boots, making their feet heavy as lead. Ashki led them, his good arm pulling them up slick banks, his body a constant, steady presence. Jamie was flagging. The blow to his head had dazed him, and the terror had stolen his strength. As they scrambled up a high, rocky bank, his foot slipped. He fell, a hard, twisting fall, his leg catching on a sharp, jutting piece of shale. He screamed, a short, sharp cry that was half pain, half sob. Jamie Clara lurched back down the bank. He was clutching his calf. The shale had sliced through his trousers, a deep, 4-inch gash that was bleeding, the red mixing with the brown mud. He is hurt, Clara said, panic rising in her throat. We have to stop. We cannot, Ashki said, his eyes scanning the ridge behind them. Harlan is close. We must, Clara insisted. She knelt, her hands shaking, ripping at the hem of her petticoat. The cloth was soaked, muddy. Ashki watched her, his face tight with pain and frustration. He looked at her futile efforts. He reached into the small pouch at his belt with his good hand, wincing as the movement pulled at his wounded arm. He held out a small, folded piece of buckskin. Inside was a fine, dark powder. Here, he said, put this in the cut. It will stop the bleeding. It will clean it. Clara looked at the strange powder, then at him. He was bleeding himself, his own arm soaked, but he was offering this to her brother. She took it. She poured the herbal powder directly into the wound. Jamie hissed in pain, but Clara's hands were firm. She pressed the powder into the cut, then took the muddy strip of her petticoat and bound it as tightly as she could. It will hold, Ashki said. For now, we must move. I know a place. He helped Jamie to his feet. The boy, his face white, leaned on Ashki, and then on his sister. The three of them, a strange, wounded, broken family, stumbled on through the rain. The place was a miracle, a high wall of sandstone, sheer and black with rain, but at its base, hidden by a curtain of ancient, dead brush, was a hollow, a deep, concave cut in the rock, higher than a man, and 20 feet deep. It was a wind-carved alcove, perfectly dry. They collapsed inside, falling onto the soft, dry sand that had collected there over centuries. Outside, the storm was a living thing. The wind howled, a high, grieving sound. The rain was a solid wall of noise, a drumming that shook the bones. Jamie was shivering, his teeth chattering. "A fire," Clara said, her voice trembling. "We need a fire." Ashki nodded. He went to the very back of the alcove, where the rock was driest. He used his knife to shave a small pile of dry wood from a piece of driftwood that had been tossed there in a long-ago flood. He took out his flint and steel. His wounded arm made him clumsy. He struck the steel, but his hand was shaking. He tried again. The spark died in the damp air. Clara put her hand over his. "Let me—" She took the steel. He held the flint. She struck it, a hard, sharp, downward motion. A bright spark. Another. A tiny, fragile curl of smoke rose from the tinder. Clara bent low, shielding it with her hands. Her hair falling forward, she blew, a long, gentle, steady breath. The smoke turned to a tiny pinpoint of orange, and then a small, wavering flame. A fire. They huddled around it, the three of them. The small flame was a living, defiant thing in the vast, noisy darkness. Jamie, his energy gone, leaned against the warm rock and fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. There was no sound but the fire, and the wind, and the rain. The alcove was small, an intimate, fragile pocket of warmth. Clara looked at Ashki. His eyes were closed. His face, in the firelight, was etched with pain. "Your arm," she said. He opened his eyes. "It will be fine." "Let me see." She did not wait for his permission. She moved, kneeling in front of him, and gently took his arm. The makeshift bandage she had tied on it hours ago was gone. The buckskin shirt was stiff with drying blood. She used the knife he had given her to cut the sleeve away. The wound was ugly. The bullet had torn through the muscle of his forearm. It was not a fatal wound, but it was deep, and it was bleeding sluggishly. She took the last clean, dry strip of her petticoat and dipped it in the small canteen of water he carried. She cleaned the wound. He winced, a sharp intake of breath, but he did not pull away. She had no more herbal powder. She just bound it, tightly, cleanly, her mender's hands working with a lifetime of practice. "Thank you," he said. His voice was low. They sat in silence for a long time. The fire crackled. "I was afraid," Clara said, her voice so quiet it was almost lost in the storm. "Harlan will not find us here," Ashki said. "The rain has washed our tracks." No, she said. She looked at him. I was afraid. At the camp. Of the marriage. The word you used. Forced. He looked down at his own hands. It felt like... She swallowed. The words hard to find. It felt like I had no choices. Like I was a pawn. Crowder was using me. Harlan was using me. And then I felt you were using me too. That it was just another cage. A more polite one. But a cage. This marriage in name only. It felt like a violation. Ashki was silent. He stared at the fire, his profile hard and clear in the orange light. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low rumble, barely louder than the wind. It was a shield. He said, that is all. It was a story. Harlan had a story, that you were a conspirator. Crowder had a story, that you were a captive. I needed a story that was stronger, a story your own law would respect, the story of a husband. It was a lie, but it was a lie to protect, not to hold. He turned his head and met her gaze. His eyes were dark, honest, and held a deep, profound sadness. I gave my word I would not touch you. I will give you another. Tomorrow, if we live, I will ride to the judge. I will sign any paper. I will tell them it was a lie to save you from Harlan. I will end it. You are not bound. You are free. The words hung in the small, warm space. You are free. Clara looked at him. The man who had taken a bullet for her. The man who had fought for her. The man who was offering her. In the middle of this storm. The one thing she had craved, her freedom. Her choice. She looked at his bound arm. She looked at her sleeping brother, safe beside the fire. She looked at his face, a face she had once seen as a savage captor, and now saw as something else. Her hand, which had been resting on her knee, moved. She did not think, she just acted. She reached across the small space and laid her hand on his. He flinched, just slightly, in surprise. His skin was warm. He did not pull away. He turned his own hand, slowly, his fingers closing around hers. It was not a grab. It was a question. She answered by lacing her fingers with his. I am here, she whispered, her voice thick. The words felt new in her mouth. Not because I am forced, not because I am a prisoner. I am here because I want to be. He looked at her, his eyes searching her face. He saw the truth. She leaned forward. He met her, his movement slow, careful, respectful. His lips touched hers. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of truth. It was a discovery. It was the taste of rain and smoke and a quiet, profound relief. It was gentle. It was a vow. It was the first truly consensual, free act of her entire life. She pulled back, her heart pounding a new, slow, steady beat. Outside, a low rumble of thunder rolled, distant, moving away. The rain was softening, the wind's howl diminishing to a sigh. The world was being washed clean. Jamie stirred, coughed, and settled deeper into sleep. They sat, hands still linked, the silence comfortable now. He will not stop, Clara said, her voice practical once more, but changed, the brittle edge gone. Crowder, he went for Pike. He will silence him. And Harlan, Ashki said, his voice grim, his thumb rubbing the back of her hand. He will not stop until he has the spring, or my body. My plan was right, Clara said, a new, hard strength in her voice. But I was wrong. I thought I could do it alone. I thought Pike was enough. He is not, Ashki said. No. I need the books, the real ledgers, and I need a witness who knows them. Crowder's clerk, a man named Peters. He is weak. He is afraid of Crowder. But I think he is more afraid of hanging. She looked at him, her eyes clear in the firelight. We need to get to Peters. We need to get the ledgers. We need to expose Crowder in front of the whole town. Ashki nodded. A slow, determined smile touched his lips. We. I like that word. He squeezed her hand, Tomorrow. We get the proof. We get the witness. We end this. A shadow moved at the mouth of the alcove. Not inside, out in the rain, just a flicker of movement, a shape blacker than the night. A man, on a horse, sitting still, scanning the cliffs, listening. It was Harlan. He had not given up. He was hunting. They both froze, their hands tightening. The fire was small, hidden. He could not see it. The shadow turned, slowly, and moved on, a ghost in the rain. The final battle was not over. It was just waiting for the dawn. Clara looked at Ashki. He looked at her. They were not protector and guest. They were not captor and prisoner. They were allies. They were partners. And the storm was not over. It was just beginning. The false dawn was cold and clean. The rain had washed the world, leaving the air sharp with the scent of wet stone and juniper. The sacred spring was full. The pool that had been a clear, quiet secret now brimming, its surface a perfect mirror of the pale, gray sky. It was a place of peace, but there was no peace. Sergeant Harlan stood on the far bank, his boots trampling the moss. His face was a mask of triumph, the bruising from Ashki's blow only making his smile more grotesque. He had 2 soldiers with him, their rifles level, and between them, his hands bound, his face pale with terror, was Jamie. "It is simple," Harlan said, his voice a pleasant, conversational boom that echoed in the small basin. "The trade, the boy for the water. Show my men where the true source is, the one that feeds this pool, and the boy lives. Refuse, and he does not." Silas Crowder was there, standing behind Harlan, his soft hands clutching a new deed. With him were 2 rough men holding shovels and a heavy, ominous crate, dynamite. They were not here to drink. They were here to dig, to divert, to own. On the opposite bank stood Clara and Ashki. They were disarmed, their hands empty. They had been intercepted on their way to the mercantile, their plan to get the ledgers cut short. Harlan, hunting them since the storm, had been waiting. He had taken Jamie and forced them here. "You will not find it," Ashki said, his voice a low, hard thing. His wounded arm was stiff, the fresh bandage Clara had made a stark white against his skin. "The water is the land. You cannot own it." "I can own this," Harlan said, gesturing to the pool. "And I can own him." He pressed the barrel of his pistol to the side of Jamie's head. Jamie whimpered, shutting his eyes. "Stop," Clara cried. "This is madness. This is not the law." "I am the law," Harlan said. "No, Sergeant, you are not." The voice was not strong, but it was righteous. It came from the canyon mouth. Reverend Pike stepped into the basin. He was not dead. His head was wrapped in a bloody, makeshift bandage. He was leaning heavily on a crutch, his left leg wrapped in a splint, and at his side, his face gray but his shoulders straight, was Abel Whitfield. Pike Crowder shrieked, his face going white with shock. "You left me for dead." "Silas," Pike said, his voice shaking but gaining strength. "You struck me down in my own church, but God is not so easily silenced." Behind Pike and Abel, the basin began to fill. Not with soldiers, with the town, the blacksmith, his forearms like logs, the stable owner, the women from the town council. They had come to see the final act, and they had come with their pastor. "Harlan," Pike said, "you are acting on a false document. I have, in my possession, the original loan papers, and I have this." From a satchel, he removed a heavy, embossed metal tool, the official seal of the Arizona Territory, sent by the circuit judge, who returned on the morning stage. "He is in my office. He is waiting." Harlan's smile faltered. He looked at the real seal, then at the forged deed in Crowder's hand. A high, angry shout came from the rim above. "Do not listen to the white man's paper. Kill them. Take the boy and we will kill them all." Nakai, he was on the rocks, with 10 warriors, their rifles and bows aimed down at the basin. The basin was a powder keg. Harlan's soldiers, Nakai's warriors, the angry townspeople. Ashki tensed, his body a coiled spring, ready for the crossfire, ready to die. No! Clara's voice was a scream that cut through the tension. She stepped into the very center of the basin, in the mud, between Harlan's pistol and Nakai's arrow. She looked up at Nakai. This is not a battle of blood, it is a battle of truth. You want to fight, then let this fight. She pulled a thin, leather-bound book from the waistband of her skirt. The ledger. They had reached the mercantile, in the chaos, before Harlan found them. Ashki had created a diversion, and she had slipped into Crowder's office and taken it. She held it up. "Mr. Peters," she called out. Crowder's pale, trembling clerk was hiding at the back of the crowd. "You are a man of the books. You know this ledger. Is this the true record of my father's account?" Peters looked at Harlan's gun, at Nakai's arrows, at Crowder's murderous face. He looked at the circuit judge's seal in Pike's hand. He knew what a federal charge for fraud meant. "Yes," he cried, his voice a high, thin wail. It is the true book. He made me hide it. He faked the signature. He forged the seal. I saw him. He said it was just business." You fool!" Crowder screamed, his civilized mask ripping away, revealing the raw, rabid animal beneath. He was not a planner. He was a cornered rat. He pulled a small silver pistol from his coat. He did not aim at Clara. He did not aim at Harlan. He aimed at the man who had betrayed him. "Peters!" he shrieked. He fired. Reverend Pike, acting on pure, holy instinct, threw himself in front of the clerk. The bullet, meant for Peters, tore through Pike's good leg. The preacher went down with a grunt of pain. The basin exploded. Harlan aimed his pistol at Clara. "You are done." Ashki was on him. He moved not as a man, but as a force. He did not go for the gun. He went for the man. He tackled Harlan. A brutal, driving collision that sent both men crashing into the shallow edge of the spring. They rolled, a tangle of limbs. Harlan's pistol lost in the mud. Nakai, on the ridge, saw Crowder's demolition man, in the panic, light a fuse. He did not shoot. He did not give a war cry. He acted. He leaped from the 10-foot ledge, landing on the man's back. A crushing, silent tackle. He ripped the sputtering stick of dynamite from the man's hand and threw it deep into the center of the spring. It hit the water with a hiss, the fuse dying. The two soldiers, seeing their sergeant down, raised their rifles, but the blacksmith and the stable owner were on them. "No more, son," the blacksmith said, his huge hand closing over a rifle barrel and twisting it away. "This ain't a war. This is a town matter." Clara moved through the chaos. She saw Harlan on his back, with Ashki's knee on his chest. She saw Nakai hauling the terrified demolition man to his feet, unarmed. She saw the townspeople surrounding the soldiers, who had gratefully laid down their arms. She walked to Silas Crowder, who was staring, his pistol empty, his world in ruins. She pulled the small knife from her boot, the one Ashki had given her. She held it to his throat. "You will sign a new paper, Silas." She pulled a folded sheet from her pocket, a confession, that the deed was a forgery, that the debt was paid, that he had conspired with Harlan to incite violence. "Sign it." His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen. He signed. She turned. Ashki was standing up, pulling Harlan to his feet. "It is over," she said. Harlan, on the ground, his face a mask of mud and hatred, had one more play, a small pistol, hidden in his boot. He drew it, aiming it at Ashki's back. Ashki. It was Jamie. He was free, his hands cut loose by the blacksmith. He grabbed a sharp, heavy rock from the spring bed and threw it with all his strength. The rock struck Harlan's wrist. The shot went wild, thudding into the dirt. Ashki was on him in an instant. There was no rage, just a single, precise, calculated blow to the side of Harlan's head. The sergeant went limp, his rein over. Silence. The townspeople, breathing hard, looked at what they had done. They looked at the bound Crowder, the unconscious Harlan, the captured soldiers. They looked at Reverend Pike, who was being tended by Clara's father, Abel, who was, for the first time in years, completely sober. They looked at Nakai, who was standing, arms crossed, not a killer, but a protector. And they looked at Ashki, who was standing beside Clara, his hand on her back, his arm bleeding, his face calm. The myths were gone. The Shadow Rider was a man. The savage had saved them. Chi Benali stepped into the basin. He walked to the edge of the spring. He looked at the townspeople, at his warriors, at his son. "The violence is done," he said, his voice quiet. "Now, the law." He looked at Pike. "The judge. We will see him. We will make a new paper. Not a paper of lies, a paper of truth. This spring, it is the life of the land. It will be protected. It will be shared by all of us." He bent, cupped his hand, and drank from the spring. The water was clear and deep and peaceful. The walk back to Dry Creek was not a retreat. It was a procession. Harlan, bound tightly at the wrists and ankles, was thrown over his own horse, his mouth gagged with his own neckerchief. Silas Crowder, his face a gray mask of ruin, was forced to walk, his hands tied, the rope held by the blacksmith. The townspeople followed, a silent, somber crowd. Their anger at the deception now cooled into a grim resolve. Reverend Pike was carried, his face pale but his eyes clear, his parishioners taking turns bearing his weight. Ashki, his arm bound in Clara's clean, white cloth, walked beside her. Chi Benali rode his mule, and Nakai and his warriors followed, their rifles now pointed to the sky, an escort, not an invading force. Jamie, his leg bandaged and stiff, walked next to his father. Abel Whitfield's hands were shaking, but not from thirst. He had his arm around his son, supporting him, and perhaps being supported in return. The circuit judge, a man with a hard face and eyes that missed nothing, was waiting on the steps of the church. He had heard the shots. He had seen the smoke. He had heard, from Mr. Peters, the whole sordid tale. The trial, if it could be called that, was brief. It was held on the church steps, with the entire town as witness and jury. Clara presented the ledger. Mr. Peters, his voice shaking, identified it and confirmed the fraud. Reverend Pike, sitting on a chair, presented the real seal and the forged deed, holding them side by side for the town to see. The blacksmith and the stable owner testified to the ambush at the spring. Clara's father, Abel, stood up. His voice, hoarse from years of disuse, was clear. "My signature was forged. My debt was a lie. My family was almost destroyed by the greed of that man." He pointed at Crowder. It was over in less than an hour. Silas Crowder was found guilty of fraud, conspiracy to incite violence, and the attempted murder of Reverend Pike. His assets, including the mercantile and the saloon, were seized by the territory, to be auctioned to pay his debts and compensate the Whitfield family. He was taken to the town jail to await transport to a federal prison. Sergeant Harlan was stripped of his rank. The judge, in a cold, flat voice, declared him dishonorably discharged from the United States Army. He was to be held alongside Crowder to face a military tribunal for his crimes: dereliction of duty, conspiracy, and attempted murder. The town, rid of its two cancers, breathed a collective, shaky sigh. That afternoon, the new town council met. It was the blacksmith, the stable owner, and Abel Whitfield, who had been elected by a silent, unanimous vote. They met in the church with Chi Benali and Ashki. A new document was drawn, not a deed, but a treaty. It was written in simple, plain English. The sacred spring and the grazing lands a mile around it were declared protected. They would remain under the stewardship of the Dine, but the town of Dry Creek would have access to the water, for drinking, not for profit, in perpetuity. The blacksmith, his face grim, proposed one last thing: Those scalp hunters. The men Harlan hired. They are still out there. Chibanali nodded. They will be back. Not if we are ready, the blacksmith said. He looked at Ashki. We need a patrol, not soldiers, but men who know the land. Your men and mine. A joint defense force, a new, fragile trust, born from a shared, bloody fight. As the meeting concluded, Nakai, who had been standing in the back of the church, his arms crossed, approached Clara. He stopped a few feet from her, his face unreadable. He looked at Ashki, then at her. You fight with paper. He said it was not a compliment, but it was not an insult. It was a statement of fact. It is a strong weapon. Clara nodded, meeting his gaze. You fight with speed and surprise. You saved Jamie. You saved us from the dynamite. That is also a strong weapon. A flicker of something, perhaps respect, passed through his dark eyes. He nodded once, a sharp, quick movement. The feud was over. That evening, they returned to the ranch. The small house was cold, the air inside stale with old fears. It felt like a lifetime had passed since Clara had stood on the porch and watched the dust storm. Jamie, exhausted, went straight to his cot and collapsed, the events of the last few days finally overwhelming him. Abel stood in the center of the room, his eyes falling on the half-empty bottle of whiskey still sitting on the table, a monument to his failure. He picked it up. Clara watched him, her heart in her throat. He walked to the door and, with a sudden, violent motion, smashed the bottle against the porch post. The glass shattered, the rank smell of the liquor filling the air for a moment before the clean desert wind took it away. He turned to Clara, his eyes wet. I am so sorry, Clara, for all of it, for my weakness, for what I let that man do. I will make it right. I swear on your mother's grave. I will be the father you deserved. Clara went to him. She did not cry. She was too tired to cry. She just put her arms around him. We will make it right. Pa, she said, her voice muffled in his shirt. Together. She forgave him, but she knew, and he knew, that the memory of his failure would be a shadow they would have to live with. But it was a start. A month passed. The town began to heal. The auction of Crowder's assets was held, with the compensation from the court. Clara bought not the mercantile, but the small, empty assay office next to it. It was just one room, with a good, solid door and a large glass window that faced the street. Her dream, she had realized, was not to leave Dry Creek. It was to build a life here. She hung a simple, hand-painted sign above the door, Whitfield Wools and Dry Goods. Her father and a now-healed Jamie worked the ranch, their flock suddenly seeming to thrive in the new, peaceful air. On her first day of business, Sani came to town. She carried a large, rolled bundle. She entered the shop, her eyes taking in the clean floor, the bolts of fabric Clara had ordered, the neat spools of thread. She unrolled the bundle. It was a rug, woven in the deep reds and blues of the desert night. It was the most beautiful thing Clara had ever seen. I will sell this for you, Clara said, touching the wool. I will not take a merchant's profit. I will take 10% for the shop. The rest is yours. A fair price. Sani smiled, a slow, deep smile. This was the bridge. She held up a smaller rug. It was a gift. The pattern was simple, stark, and powerful. A single, jagged line of yellow lightning, striking a calm, horizontal line of blue, the storm and the spring. Clara took it with trembling hands and hung it on the wall behind her counter. Reverend Pike, his leg healing, now walked with a permanent, dignified limp. He and Chibanali had become fixtures, meeting once a week in the church. They would sit for hours, Pike with his Bible, Chi with his stories, writing, as Pike said, a dictionary of our two laws. One afternoon, they both entered her new shop. Ashki was already there, his healed arm resting on the counter, talking with Clara about the wool prices. Clara, Ashki, Pike said, his voice warm. He held a piece of paper. I have just returned from the county seat. The judge has signed the final papers. Marriage in name only has been officially annulled. It is as if it never happened. He smiled kindly at her. You are a free woman. Clara. Clara smiled. She looked at Ashki. He was watching her, his love for her a quiet, steady fire in his eyes. Thank you, Reverend, Clara said. She reached out and took Ashki's hand. We know. Ashki turned to the two old men. Reverend, Elder. His voice was formal, but warm. Clara and I would like to ask a favor. We would like to make a new vow. Not a shield, not a paper lie. He squeezed her hand, a choice. And so, in the small shop, under the rug of the lightning and the stream, they were married. It was not a grand affair. There were only 4 witnesses, Abel and Jamie, who stood by the door, their faces bright. Reverend Pike read a simple verse about 2 houses built on a foundation of rock. Chi Benali gave a blessing in his own language, his voice a low, beautiful song, asking the spirits of the earth and sky to watch over the 2 who had chosen to walk as one. That evening, Clara and Ashki stood on the porch of the small shop. The sun was setting, turning the high mesas a deep, burning purple. The air was cool, the wind carrying the first, clean promise of the coming rainy season. The desert smelled of cedar and the sweet, sharp scent of artemisia. Dry Creek was quiet. It was the sound of a town at peace, a town mending, a town with a future. They stood, watching the sky, their hands linked. They did not have to speak. They had, at last, found their own true language. The first water day was held 3 months after the trial, when the summer rains had turned the high desert grasses a pale, fleeting green. It was not a holiday that was declared. It was a day that simply happened, an agreement between 2 peoples to honor the spring that had almost destroyed them, and had instead united them. The celebration was held in the wide, flat meadow between Dry Creek and the mesas. It was neutral ground, belonging to no one, and now to everyone. Clara watched from the shade of a wagon, her hand resting on the counter of a makeshift stall she had set up, selling fresh bread and offering cool water. Her shop, Whitfield Wools and Dry Goods, was thriving, but today it was closed. Today was for the water. The air was full of sounds that had never mixed before, the bright, sharp twang of a banjo from the town's musicians, and the deep, rhythmic pulse of a dine drum. Men were singing, their voices blending in a strange, new harmony. Children, who a few months ago would have hidden from one another, were now a single, screaming, laughing pack. They were playing a game that was half tag, half a dine game of sticks and hoops. Their faces were smudged with dirt and watermelon juice. They learn faster than we do, a voice said. Clara turned. Reverend Pike was standing beside her, his new cane of polished juniper wood resting on the ground. His limp was a permanent, quiet reminder of the cost of peace. They do not have as much to unlearn, Reverend, Clara said, smiling. They watched the centerpiece of the day, the horse races. The long, flat meadow was a perfect track. The young men from the town, on their heavy ranch horses, were competing against the dine warriors on their fast, wiry ponies. Jamie was in the thick of it, riding old Meg, who was surprisingly fast without a heavy saddle. He was racing against Nakai. Clara held her breath as they thundered past. Nakai, his face no longer a mask of anger but of fierce, competitive joy, leaned low, his hair streaming. He passed Jamie in a cloud of dust, raising a hand in triumph, and Jamie, far from being sullen, laughed and raised a hand in return. A new world, Pike murmured, and went to find Chi Benali. Later, as the sun began to dip, painting the clouds in shades of apricot and rose, Clara looked for Ashki. He was not in the races. He had been working, quietly, all day. He was the head of the new defense patrol, and he moved between the 2 groups, a silent, steady thread, ensuring the peace held. She found him by the spring. The water was high, the pool a deep, calm turquoise. The town had, as its first joint project, built a simple stone wall around it, not to keep people out, but to honor the place. He was standing, watching the water, his arms crossed. The wound on his arm had healed to a long, silver scar, a story written on his skin. She came up beside him, her hand finding his. "It is a good day," she said, her voice soft. "It is a day of peace," he replied, turning to her. His love for her was a quiet, steady thing. It was not the loud thunder of the storm they had endured, but the deep, sure peace of the water it had brought. He reached into his pocket. "I have something." It was not a ring, it was a bracelet, forged of simple, heavy silver, hammered into a flat band. It was etched with a single, repeating pattern, a zigzag line. Lightning. "It is my vow," he said, his voice low, "for her alone, that my strength will always be your shield." He slid it onto her wrist. It was cool and heavy and real. Clara's eyes filled with tears. She reached into her own pocket. "I have something too." Hers was different. It was also silver, but it was a thinner, twisted wire, polished to a high shine, like a thread of water. "It is my vow," she whispered, her voice thick. She fastened it around his wrist, her mentor's hands sure and gentle, "that my life will always be woven with yours." He did not kiss her. He simply held her, his hand over hers, their new silver bracelets touching, a silent, binding promise. They would protect each other, and they would protect the water. The future, which had once been a wall of dust, was now a plan. The small room behind Clara's shop was, on 2 afternoons a week, a school. She would have 5 children from the town, and 4 from the Dine village. She taught them their letters, reading from an old book of fables, and on the other side of the room, Sani, Ashki's mother, would sit at a loom, teaching the town's children how to weave, their hands fumbling with the bright, strong wool. A new generation, learning both the book and the loom. Ashki's patrol was a success. He trained them. His old, angry rival Nakai, now his most trusted lieutenant. They trained the town men, the blacksmith and the ranch hands. Not in the ways of war, but in the ways of the land. How to read a track, how to spot a broken branch, how to see a threat before it arrived. The scalp hunters, hearing that Dry Creek was now guarded by a joint force, moved on to easier, more hateful hunting grounds. Justice, Clara had learned, was not about revenge. It was not about seeing Crowder in a cage or Harlan in chains. It was about the slow, difficult, daily work of mending. It was about restoration, about making a broken thing whole again. The mending of her own family was the most difficult and the most rewarding. One evening, her father, Abel, came into her shop. He was sober. He had been sober for 3 months. His hands had stopped shaking. He was carrying the old, leather-bound ledger from the ranch. "Clara," he said, his voice quiet. He laid the book on the counter. Inside, on the first page, he had written a new deed. He was turning the land, all of it, over to her. "It was always yours, daughter. I was just too blind to see it. Your mother, she would be so proud." "She is proud, Pa," Clara said. And she was, for the first time in years, the daughter, and he, the father. And Jamie, her brother, who had started the fire, was now learning to control it. He had found his calling not as a rancher, but as a maker. He had been apprenticed, at his own request, to the Dine blacksmith, a man whose work with silver and iron was like magic. Jamie's hands, once restless and destructive, were now strong, steady, and skilled. He was at the forge, learning to make things that lasted. The new world had a new rhythm. The ranch, the shop, and the village. Abel and Jamie would bring their wool to Clara. She would pay them a fair price. She would sell the wool and the blankets the dine weavers brought to her for a fair profit. The village, now with honest coin, would buy flour and steel and tools from her. It was a circle, not a one-way street. It was not debt. It was trade. It was a promise. In the spring, their shared heart remained clear. That night, Clara stood in her shop, locking the door. The last light of the day fell on the rug Sonny had given her, the one that hung on the wall, the lightning and the stream. She had, just that morning, added the final, tiny stitch to the small tear at the edge, the one she had mended when she was still a prisoner. It was complete now. She looked at the pattern, the jagged yellow line of the storm, the calm blue line of the water, and for the first time, she saw the other pattern, the one she had missed, the diagonal lines that held the two together. Two lives from two worlds, running in parallel, and then, in a flash of violence and a night of rain, intersecting, becoming one. Freedom, she thought, was not the dream of leaving. It was not the shop in the east, the life with no grit. Freedom was the hard, clear, adult choice of who to become, and where to stand, and who to stand with. Ashki was waiting for her on the porch. He was wearing the hat she had bought him, a simple, low-crowned rancher's hat, to keep the sun from his eyes. He smiled as she came out, and he took her hand. The desert wind blew over the brim of his hat. The artemisia scent sweet and sharp. They held hands, moving forward, not because they were bound, but because they had chosen. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly hope you enjoyed it. Where in the world are you listening from? Let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts. Please be sure to subscribe to the Wild West Tales channel, like this video, and if you really enjoyed it, hit that hype button to help this story reach more listeners just like you.